Hamish and I, co-founders of Substack, are very excited to be live with Glenn Greenwald. Glenn is a legendary journalist, a best-selling author, and a prolific Twitter troll, if you don't mind me saying.
Absolutely. No, that's one of my proudest accomplishments.
You co-founded The Intercept. You hosted a live news show, System Update. Glenn, you were on Substack a few years ago. You left us for a bit, but now you're back. This is the triumphant return, bigger and better than ever. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'm so happy to be back. As you both know, when I first joined, I did so basically with no plan at all, no thought about joining until pretty much the day that I did, because I didn't anticipate that I would be leaving The Intercept so abruptly. And not only did I need a place to go to do my journalism, I needed a place to kind of write and explain why I had left The Intercept. And I think we got everything set up within about 48 hours or even less.
I remember. I
And
remember choosing your dog logo for your publication with you the night
yeah,
before you were going live. Yeah.
exactly. And we never changed that because it ended up working. At first, we're like, oh, this is some like really crude, but like still pleasant graphic that at some point will change. And I think had we changed it, we would have had like a rebellion on the part of our subscribers who came to really love it. But yeah, it was, it just, even though I just jumped in, it ended up being really the perfect place for me. And I am genuinely excited to be back. I feel so good already.
Why were you away for so long? It's been 3 years. This is an emotional moment for Chris and I because you're early in the Substack growth period. But yeah, what took you so long?
Yeah, I want to talk about that too, because I actually, before we came here, I was thinking about what that was like, what the era was like, and the environment was like, especially for Substack in 2020. I think I came in like late October of 2020, and it was just a completely different world. But basically, I loved it here, and I everything was great, everything was going really well, and I kind of got enticed by this, offer from Rumble, which had uh received a bunch of investment, was really rapidly growing, and they wanted to kind of build a network of shows, people who were hosting live shows. And it was something I had never done before, never thought about doing. But for that reason, I thought I probably should do it. That's something I've always tried to do in my work, is just keep moving, keep changing so that things don't get too stagnant or complacent. I think it's important to just keep challenging yourself. And I remember, I talked to a bunch of people who had done similar types of shows for TV or cable or the internet. And they were like, look, you just make sure that you know what you're getting into. Like doing a show every night, a live politics and news show every night. It's extremely consuming and intense and draining. You're not going to have time for anything else. And I don't think I really believed them. I was like that, I'm sure that's your experience, but I don't think it will be
I'll only
mine.
be
But
able to
it did
write
end up being
3
mine.
things a week and
Yeah,
tweet
I was like, I'll
10,000
just
times instead of
churn
20.
it out. Exactly, exactly. But, it is true, like, when you have the show at night lurking, even though I loved it, even though we did find, like, a big new audience of people who these days prefer to consume things by video, um, I really most missed writing. Like, that's what I love to do most. That's always where my journalism has been most effective. And just having the time, too, to take, to do investigations, to do more research, which is really hard to do when you're producing a nightly show. So I agreed to a 3-year deal with Rumble. Our deal ended last month. And so I think, everyone's happy that I'm back here. I know I am.
I'm thrilled. Personally, I'm a Substack maximalist, as you might imagine. And so I've been missing my Glenn Greenwald's posts and Substack content. It's been killing me.
Well, it's funny. I woke up today. I have done a little bit of writing over the last few years, like principally in Brazil. I'm a columnist for the largest newspaper in Brazil. But I even found, like, when I had to write for that paper, and I do reporting for them as well, just the process of sitting down and writing, which used to be so natural to me, just used to flow so easily, was almost like a struggle because I was doing it so intermittently and I wasn't really part of what I was thinking about every day. And so I woke up this morning so excited, like knowing that there was this empty Substack page waiting for me to go fill it. And I had like 8 different things I wanted to write about. And I chose one and I just, sat down and wrote it. And it was really like riding a bike. It just came out like it was so, I don't know, it's just such a good way of expressing yourself, of like explaining things, of showing things, of communicating things. So yeah, I just, but like, we were chatting a little bit before we began here. everything here is new. Like the only thing that is here that was there there back when I was here, I think it was like 3 years ago or so, is like, post a written article, but every other feature is completely new. So I was saying, I feel like this old geezer, this boomer trying to like navigate through this technology I've never seen before, but I'm sure I'll figure it out.
That's right. I don't think we even had an app 3 years ago, or maybe it was brand new, and the notes feed, which is kind of like Twitter but for sane people, wasn't launched there. And this Substack Live, I believe this is your first ever live, but it
Yeah,
does feel like a lot of these tools are kind of like were made in the lab to suit someone exactly like Greenwald.
totally. I mean,
Hmm.
it's so funny. Like, even though when I first started reading about politics, which is 2005, so like 8 universes ago in the scheme of things, the foundations remain, I think, pretty much the same, at least for me. Like I didn't, have a journalism career where I went work for like some traditional paper. I just started a blog because I had things that I wanted to say that I didn't think were being said. And by far the central driving force and the primary benefit of that was the fact that there was this comment section. And as you develop readership and it accumulates, you post something, you publish an article, and you immediately get feedback. And there's like a dialogue between you and your readers. They'll tell you, oh, I don't think this is very well reasoned. This evidence seems to be kind of lacking, or, oh, here's some other things that you didn't know about that bolster what you're trying to say. And this dialogue, like this community, became so central to my ability to grow a big readership quickly. I mean, I spend as much time engaging with readers that as I did writing. And I do think that's a big difference between new media and kind of the way media had always been done previously, which is always this kind of like we're the journalists who sit on the mountaintop and we pass down the truth and the wisdom to the
Mm.
passive audience. And maybe if you want some feedback, you can write a letter to the editor, which we'll never see and laugh at if we do, and throw away into the garbage can. But like the ability to just build a community and have like constant interaction with your readers about what you're saying, what you're writing, what you're doing is so valuable in so many ways. And as you say, all these new tools seem like perfectly designed to foster that.
Well, that thing you're describing there as well, I think has played a central role in the change in how much people trust the media over time. If you're like an old centralized institution that is kind of pronouncing the official narratives, even if you've worked really hard to get to the truth before you make those pronouncements, then it's harder to trust in this internet era where people have seen that there can be a two-way dialogue, and they've got used to being able to talk to people like you and hear back from you and force you to sort of defend yourself in some positions. And I know, like, in you in particular, you are willing to go against your audience's pre-existing beliefs in many cases. I know your audience is diverse, but especially in this last few years, there have been some issues where you and the bulk of your audience diverge on core issues, which counterintuitively is actually a trust building measure. It's something that the two-way dialogue helps to bolster rather than undermine, which is like the old way of doing things. When if you didn't agree with the central institution, then it makes you feel less trusting of it.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, if somebody were trying to start now and asked me, like, what's the easiest, quickest, fastest way to find a large audience and find success, I might say, sort of do the opposite of what I do, which is like plant your flag in some faction. This is my party, this is my ideology, this is my candidate, this is my space and like the political ecosystem, and just, give the people what they want. Just like validate them, pour this kind of messaging into your audience that they want to hear, that they feel good about hearing. I think if you look at a lot of successful new media and independent media type of platforms, it very much is that. But there's also a huge amount of independent media that kind of takes the harder route, but I think ultimately the better route, like and even the more successful route, which is you're trying to cultivate an audience that isn't coming because they expect you to tell them what they want to hear, or because they're going to agree with you a lot of times. A lot of times they're going to be hearing things, or that you're going to try to give a perspective that they really don't want to accept, they vehemently disagree with. And and you're going to lose for sure, like readers or audience because of that. Not everybody wants that. But over time, and I've been doing this for 20 years, I feel like we have developed an audience that is characterized primarily by the knowledge that if they come and listen to what I have to say or read what I've written, they may not agree with it. Oftentimes they probably won't, but they're going to at least know that I'm always doing my best to kind of present the truth as I see it, as I think the evidence shapes it. And I think there's a huge number of people who are willing to stay with you as long as they know that's the exercise in which you're engaged.
Completely.
It's interesting you said that is not just maybe a better way to do journalism or do commentary or find truth, but ultimately it might be more successful. I'd be interested to hear what do you think is the opportunity for the good, the long-term opportunity for doing the good, smart, principled version of the thing versus kind of the red meat, cheerlead for a side could be replaced by an AI bot that is pulling for one team version of the thing.
Yeah. I mean, to me, like there are certain things that can be really high quality, even if they don't have impact on a lot of other people, like art or poetry or music. Like it's sort of unto itself. Like, what is the quality of that? I know there's been poetry that gets discovered like 300 years later and makes a big impact, but made none at the time. And it didn't mean it wasn't, high art or whatever. I never looked at journalism that way. I have always looked at journalism as being a good journalism that doesn't make an impact, that doesn't influence things, for me is an oxymoron. Like journalism is about getting people to see things that maybe others don't want them to see or that haven't been seen by others in a way that influences people, get people to open their mind, think differently about things, be open to the fact that maybe they're being propagandized, that their views aren't, as well thought through as they might be if they looked at other evidence. And if you develop a huge, gigantic audience, which again, people have done very lucratively and very well, that is there because you're all kind of uh, assembling around a certain singular cause or party or ideology or whatever, you're going to have a large audience. You're going to make a lot of money. It's going to seem like you're having a lot of reach, but you're not really impacting or influencing much because the people who are gathered there are people who are already they're gathered there because they're on your side. And maybe there's some value in kind of preaching to the choir. The choir gets more excited and more active and more engaged. Like there probably is value in that. But I think, a smaller audience of people who are there because they're there because they want to have an open mind, they want to be susceptible to thinking about things differently, brings a lot more influence, confers a lot more impact than one that's just organizing like a political rally.
Right. If you're optimizing for clicks and views, you just want it. That's how you can be successful in the former. But if you're optimizing for having an impact on the world, then it's just definitionally better to be in that latter category.
Yeah. Which, look, I don't want to, feign this sort of, like pure spirit that I think doesn't serve you well. If you, again, I mean, you do have to think about, if you want to do good journalism, how to make people come and pay attention to what you're writing, because there's a literally infinite number of choices at any given moment about what people can do in the world, online, wherever. And you have to give them a reason to want to pay attention. And so you do have to think about how you're going to attract attention, how you're going to make people interested or entertained, or, it's not, you can't just feed people broccoli and tell them to swallow it because it's for their own good without trying to get them to be excited about it, like trying to make it enticing. So I do think about that, how to make sure that what I'm saying and doing, is kind of making a ripple, because if you don't reach people that way, again, you can't really have an impact on them because they're not going to be paying attention. But I think that is like ultimate. I was thinking a lot of, like I told you guys, I was thinking, over the past month when I was thinking about coming back here, making the decision about whether to stay and do what I was doing or changing and coming back. And then even, in the process of like explaining to my audience why we made the choice we did, like to come back to Substack, I really was thinking a lot about what my first experience was like. And I really haven't thought about this. I mean, you guys probably have because you've been here the whole time and it's what you do. But I remember, when I first came here, it was at the end of 2020, which was still the kind of emerging fallout from the murder of George Floyd, as well as the tail end of the first year of COVID. And the repression in the discourse, like the idea that only certain views should be permitted and other views aren't just wrong but ought to be suppressed, was probably at its peak. That was probably like the height of this notion that it's a societal good not to allow dissent to certain ideas to be heard. And because Substack was created to oppose that idea, to say, no, the point here is these are independent writers. They can say anything they want. If they find an audience, great. If they don't, that's up to them as well. That you provided this space where you refuse to censor. Substack was incredibly controversial. I'm sure you remember when I first came here, there was a zillion think pieces about whether Substack was, going to corrupt everything. It was the root of all evil, solely by virtue of your resistance and refusal to censor. And now I think like 5-6 years later, Substack has won that debate. I mean, I think you're still as much committed to free speech. It's just not quite as dangerous or upsetting of an idea to people as it was back then.
If anything, I'd say, people from other parts of the political spectrum have come to see the wisdom in that approach over time, as power changes hands, as the culture and the vibe shifts. The principle of having a free speech and a free press is a neutral principle. It's not doesn't belong to one part of the political spectrum. And I think over a long enough time horizon, if you're a principled defender of it, you'll catch flack from all sides if you're doing a good job of it, as I'm sure you've felt. One thing you said that was really interesting to me is the eat your broccoli thing. This is something we say at Substack a lot, is, we don't want to be the eat your vegetables platform. Yes, this is about long form content. It's about things that are smart and good, but that doesn't mean that we're above having a short form feed, having video, having, translating articles into audio now that people can listen to. Now that you're sort of starting to explore some of the new Substack features, maybe especially this live, which is your first live, do you see yourself experimenting with some of the stuff? And how do you think about video now that you're in this world?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, video is more or less what I've been doing for the last 3 months. And then in the last month or two, as we kind of started deciding that we're probably going to no longer produce a nightly show at Rumble, live nightly show, we started to produce content exclusively for YouTube, or primarily for YouTube, not really exclusively, just that's where we were doing it to build, and because we were always putting video segments from the show on there. So it kind of built up pretty rapidly. And so I do think there's a lot that video has to offer, even though I still want to focus on writing and intend to do a lot of video. Just for example, I do think interviews with people.
Mm-hmm.
I've never liked the idea of interviewing someone or a group of people and then having readers be forced to rely on my summation of what they said, or my picking and choosing the things they said that are important and leaving out the things that aren't. I always preferred to let them see the interaction, to at least read a full transcript. So I think when you're going to interview somebody, as long as they're willing to, video is crucial, like we're doing now. We could have had this conversation and then somebody could have written it up and summarized it, or someone could have just made a transcript. I think there's a lot to the dynamic of seeing how people are speaking to each other, how they're speaking, the tone of voice, like all these things convey information that are important. And then also sometimes they're just things that, like if you want to analyze and pick apart video content, you almost have to do it by video, because you need to be able to show people the video and then kind of respond in kind. So the fact that Rumble has not just the ability to have, long form articles as it always did, but also, and these kind of community building tools, but you guys have like podcasts and these kind of live things and videos. That's really what swung the pendulum in favor of coming back here. Because also, as I said at the start, I do want to always feel like I'm being challenged. Like I feel like I want to always feel like I have to figure things out and expand what I'm doing or change the way I'm doing. Otherwise, you just get so kind of, just stagnant in everything that you're doing. It starts to feel like labor, like a job instead of like a passion, something exciting. I think that spills over too into how people react to what you're doing.
I wonder what you think of the state of the media ecosystem now. Like, you've been a few places. You've been off in Rumble Land for 3 years. You've been on Substack in the early days. You were working with newspapers. You had a blog in the heyday of blogging. And there's been lots of anxiety about the state of media. Like the Washington Post just laid off a third of their reporters the other day. But how does it look like to you? Like, what does the health of the media ecosystem look like to you as it's going through this transition?
It's funny that I was going to write about, that was my other topic I almost wrote about today, were these Washington Post layoffs and exactly what you just asked about. But I just thought, starting like with an article about how much corporate media sucks would be just a little too like predictable and self-serving. So I'll probably write that tomorrow or Wednesday, but or whatever today is, tomorrow or Friday. But these layoff rituals, which we've seen so many times, and the Washington Post one was, by far the most traumatic for people because of its size, because of what it meant for the Washington Post, this like beloved institution, at least among media professionals, or at least among some. It's what always happens is you have this kind of personal trauma, which is very real. I mean, people lose their jobs that they've had for a long time. That is upsetting. I totally understand that. No minimizing that at all. And then it's usually followed by this very self-important, unified decree that one of the reasons it's so terrible when journalists get laid off is because these journalists in corporate media are performing such a vital, crucial, essential role that when they lose their jobs, it's not just bad for them, but bad for democracy, bad for America, bad for the world. And then they get simultaneously very angry about the fact that there have been layoffs, as though their work is so noble and so uniquely valuable that they should be divinely entitled to have a job for forever. And the reality is that it's not just that a lot of these outlets are failing because people have moved away, although that is definitely the case. Even more damagingly is the fact that the public has just lost faith and trust in these media institutions. Every poll shows that, and it gets more and more severe as each year goes by. The public just doesn't trust large media outlets or media brands any longer. They believe, in fact, that not only is it unreliable, but that they're purposely, whether this is true or not, this is absolutely what most Americans believe, that they're purposely disseminating false claims or misleading claims or being deceitful in order to advance some sort of political or partisan or ideological agenda. And once people perceive that about you, that is just a completely insurmountable problem unless you reverse it. And what amazes me about these layoff rituals is that there's never a moment, and this is true going back years, where most of these journalists will stop in a minute and look in the mirror and say, why is this happening? Why is our industry collapsing? Why has public faith and trust in our institutions evaporated and so rapidly unraveled? Is it because of anything that we're doing? Have we contributed to the erosion of faith and trust on the part of the public that in turn is causing these businesses to fail, which is incinerating our jobs? There's no self-reflection, no introspection, no assumption of responsibility at all. And it's like the more this happens, the angrier they get, the more entitled they get, and the less willing they are to look at their own behavior. And I kind of am amazed by that. I mean, I guess we all resist us accepting blame and assigning responsibility for ourselves, but I think being an adult is overcoming that resistance. Yeah. And I think that's a big problem in journalism.
I've talked to some people in this position that I would describe as having reached the bargaining phase of grief, where they say, okay, I understand that there's been this big loss of trust, and I'm willing to accept that we've had a hand in that and that we need to reform. And I've diagnosed the problem, and I think the problem is we haven't explained ourselves well enough just how vital and important we are and how much of a key, pillar of democracy this work is. And if we only explain just a little better why we are so great, that's the flaws. Like, we haven't kind of like sold the thing enough. And it strikes me that I think I maybe agree with the core point you're saying of, if you can't reckon with the underlying cause, you're not going to have a hope of fixing it. But what would you say to people? Like, I've seen a turn in the past couple of years, maybe, where some people who previously were really big critics of the legacy media have made an argument that says, look, we've kind of gone out of the frying pan into the fire here. Yes, maybe the legacy was corrupt in these ways. It had these problems. It had this trust deficit. But look at where we are now. Look at where people are following everybody on YouTube and everybody on Rumble and everybody on Substack. And the breadth of what you can get ranges from, yes, very excellent, very principled, very good stuff, all the way to crank lunacy. And there's you might say that for all of the faults of the legacy media, the new unrestricted thing is worse, and that there's people who are just so off the deep end that this is actually a step backwards. What would you say to those people?
I think, first of all, that even people who are critics of legacy media, or people inside corporate media who are willing to go even further than, oh no, we're doing a great job, the problem is people just don't appreciate what a great job we're doing, which has become the tool that institutions use to take responsibility to the extent they ever do. Like during the Biden administration, polls showed overwhelmingly people hated the economy, felt like it was endangering their economic security. And all Democrats were really willing to say was, oh no, the problem here is that we actually doing amazing things for them. They ought to feel gratitude. They just don't appreciate it yet. They don't realize how good they have it, how much gratitude they should have for us. And the only thing we need to improve is our ability to communicate to them how great we are. And that has become that. But I think even the people willing to go further than that and say, yeah, maybe there's something in corporate media that has kind of gone off the rails a little bit that need to be fixed, don't fully appreciate how bad things have gotten. Because, you do hear all the time, like independent media is filled with conspiracy theories and unfounded claims and things that are fact. And that's all true. Obviously, you can find all sorts of crazy stuff on the internet, including among shows that are, or writers who are popular. But at the same time, the New York Times and the Atlantic and the New Yorker lied the United States into a war with Iraq based on claims that anonymous people inside the government told them to write down, which they dutifully did, and they turned out to be totally false. And then we went through the 2008 financial crisis, which was like a massive institutional failure on the part of every center of authority in the United States, followed by, falsehoods about COVID and all sorts of things about Russiagate and Trump and the Hunter Biden laptop and, just people feeling like they've been fed not just slightly inaccurate claims, but that they've been just radically lied to in very damaging ways. And so, yes, it's fine to say, okay, look, we're the New York Times, we're the Washington Post, we're NBC News. We get things wrong, but we're not like crazy, conspiracists. We're not like off the deep end with falsehoods like these people that you can find on the internet. It may not be as glaring because typically they reflect establishment wisdom. So it always seems like they have one foot in sort of reality. But in a lot of ways, what they do in that regard is as bad and even more damaging precisely because they have inherited this notion that they are sort of institutionally valid. That said, I do think there are a lot of problems with independent media, including what you kind of alluded to at the beginning, which is this idea of audience capture. If your audience is the one that's paying your bills, you're going to be afraid to alienate your boss or alienate advertisers or billionaires who finance you. You might be scared to alienate them because you might lose subscribers, and you probably will. But and that is a huge problem because that keeps people captive to the wants of their readers, and they end up feeding them even things that they know aren't true. And like I said, you can get short-term benefit from that, but I think long-term credible independent media requires a willingness on the part of people to alienate their audience at times if they believe it's necessary to be honest. And over time, that will build up that trust in independent media. I do think we absolutely need independent media. There's way too few voices without it concentrated in the hands of very homogenized, powerful, and wealthy interests. Independent media is crucial, which is why I think free speech online is such a paramount cause, because without it, independent media can't exist. Sure, it has its flaws, and I think people need to be careful consumers, like make sure that you're not being deceived or, taken in by charlatans.
I think that concentration point is really interesting. Like arguably the biggest damage done, you mentioned the Iraq war and other things, is not because there was somebody that said the wrong thing, but because there's in these moments of uniformity, of when the space of what's allowed to be said and thought collapses into one thing, and you can kind of get this herding behavior of everybody has to agree with this. This is the only thing that can be. And if you have even a small error when you're in that mode, the results can be catastrophic. Whereas when you have kind of this broad clamoring of voices from every direction, even if some of them are completely off the deep end, you don't run the same risk of kind of narrowing the acceptable truth into a place where it can do that kind of moral panic damage that lets things go really off the rails.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to me, that is the main benefit of independent media, is that we are herd animals. I mean, we're built that way. We're social and political animals. We are designed to be tribal in our nature. And that means we have this like instinctive fear of being cast out and expelled from tribal decency because, 5,000 years ago, being expelled from your tribe meant you would die. Like your survival required kind of being accepted and included. And it is hard for human beings, all of us, to resist that, when everybody's kind of in a consensus and then that consensus builds into like a frenzy or a moral panic where there's going to be negative consequences, at least to your reputation, if not beyond that, to kind of sticking your head up and saying, I don't know, this doesn't all seem right to me. Maybe this other way of looking at things is actually the better way. And if I'll just give you a quick anecdote that kind of illustrates this to me that really alarmed me and amazed me. So, when Russiagate first emerged, I really was unpersuaded by it. And as it went on, the corporate media just almost all united behind it. Like this was not only true, but the most important story. And I never felt like it was persuasive in any evidentiary way. And fortunately, I was in independent media. I was at The Intercept that we had created. I did have, until I didn't, total independent editorial freedom there to say what I wanted without fear of losing my job. So I was able to bang on the table and say, Russiagate seems like very exaggerated to me, a lot of claims being made without evidence. And I would get a lot of times like messages from people who worked in major media organizations saying, oh, I'm so glad you're saying this. And implicit in that was, I can't. And the reason they couldn't is because, in an environment where there are layoffs and media outlets disappearing, if you stick your head up for one day and you're the target of the anger of, let's say, liberal Twitter or, professional media Twitter, just for one day, that will ensure
liberal
that you'll
Twitter.
be at the top of the list.
That was an era.
What's that?
I said, I remember liberal Twitter. That was an era.
Yeah, and it was a powerful force. I mean, it was the dominant hegemonic force in our discourse for quite a while until Elon bought it. And the power of it was that all they had to do was castigate you for 1 or 2 days. And if you were within it, if you depended on, that media sphere, that kind of an attack or that kind of like a herd critique or attack on you meant that if there were layoffs, you'd be easily put to the top of the list. If there were, a job opening that, 40 different journalists applied to, you'd go right to the bottom. And they were petrified. And journalists who can't push back against the grain or express heterodox views or push back against consensus don't really have a valuable role. That is extremely damaging to journalism.
And this was the great thing about, or the thing that we were able to help with at Substack at the time, was if you were on Substack and you became the main character and everybody was yelling at you, you made money. Like that was, you were sort of, it's like, hey, I'm doing a thing that matters. The fact that I'm stirring up the ire of this thing, actually, I'm anti-fragile to it. That can serve and actually help the thing I'm doing, which I think helps create
and not only that, not only like making money in the sense of just like, oh, I'm getting rich, but then you could like hire other writers and you could like pay outside writers to come and write for you and like build, like a kind of like a mini news organization based on these principles. And that's, what we were able to do. We found a big audience on Substack and, suddenly I had like editors and researchers and outside people who were able to write that I was able to pay. And now you kind of have like this mini mission and you have a bunch of those at Substack. And so not only don't you get punished for pushing back, as you said, against dissent, you get rewarded. I mean, not if you're just doing it for the sake of doing it or doing it idiotically or like theatrically or for attention. But if you're doing it in a meaningful way, you now have a place, which was Substack even back then, I think even more so now, where you can like fortify yourself against it. You don't have to feel those pressures. In fact, you can express contempt toward them.
Amazing. Well, that's a good reason as any for people to hit the subscribe button and subscribe to Glenn's Substack if for some reason you haven't already. What else would you like people to know? Where can people find you outside of smashing subscribe?
Yeah, just like on standard social media, like I said, we have this YouTube channel, but those videos, whatever we post there will always be posted at Substack as well for our subscribers and a lot more. So yeah, I mean, basically the centerpiece of my work and my journalism is going to be Substack. So the page is named Glenn Greenwald because we didn't even have time at the time we created it to think of a name. It's a perfectly fine name. I think
it's a great name.
Kind of
it has a certain ring to it.
Exactly. So yeah, I hope for those of you who aren't there, I would love to see everybody there.
Fantastic. Well, we are delighted to have you back. Welcome back to Substack.
Yeah, great to see you guys. Thank you so much, Hamish and Chris. Really happy to be back. Bye.
Thanks, Cheers.